The bullet missed Penelope Carson's head by 3 inches, and she knew immediately that staying in Silver Ridge, Nevada, would mean dying there. The summer of 1878 had turned brutal, not just from the relentless sun that baked the desert valley, but from the men who wanted her father's land claims and didn't care who they had to kill to get them. Her father had already fallen 2 weeks ago, shot in the back outside the assayer's office, and Penelope had barely escaped their clutches by hiding in a freight wagon headed south through the territory. The wagon dropped her in Tropic, a small settlement in southern Utah Territory where red rock canyons stretched toward impossible blue skies, and the Virgin River carved its patient path through ancient stone. She had $30 sewn into her dress hem, a carpet bag with 2 changes of clothes, and absolutely no idea how she would survive. At 22 years old, she had lived her entire life as the daughter of a prospector who dragged her from camp to camp, feeding her from chuck wagons and whatever he could cook over a campfire. She had never learned the domestic arts that respectable women possessed. She could shoot, ride, and read geological surveys, but she couldn't sew a straight seam or prepare a decent meal to save her life. The first thing she needed was work, and the second was a place far enough from the main road that those Silver Ridge men wouldn't find her if they came looking. Tropic seemed small enough to disappear into, with its handful of buildings clustered along the river and farms spreading out into the valley, where Mormon settlers had carved out an existence from the red earth. She walked down the dusty main street, her boots kicking up small clouds with each step, trying to look purposeful rather than desperate. The general store had a help wanted notice in the window, but when she inquired, the proprietor looked her up and down and said he needed someone who could keep house for him above the store. She lasted exactly 3 questions into the interview before it became clear that housekeeping wasn't the primary duty he had in mind. She left quickly, her face burning. The boarding house was run by a severe woman named Mrs. Kimball, who quoted her a weekly rate that would burn through her savings in a month. When Penelope asked about work, Mrs. Kimball suggested she try the hotel restaurant, but warned her that Will Thompson, who owned it, was particular about his staff. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of the only 2-story building in Tropic, with windows facing the street and a hand-painted sign that read "Thompson's Table" in neat letters. Through the glass, Penelope could see white tablecloths on 6 tables and actual curtains, not just canvas or bare windows. It looked like civilization, which made her both hopeful and nervous. She pushed through the door, and a small bell chimed above her head. The interior smelled like fresh bread and coffee, with undertones of something savory that made her stomach clench with hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. A man emerged from the kitchen in the back, wiping his hands on a towel tucked into his belt. He was tall, probably 30 or so, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and brown eyes that assessed her with quick intelligence. He wore a clean white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, dark trousers, and an apron that had seen recent use but wasn't filthy like the ones she'd seen in mining camp kitchens. "We're not open for another hour," he said, but his tone wasn't unkind. "Supper starts at 5. "I'm not here to eat," Penelope said, then amended, "Well, I am eventually, but first I'm looking for work. Mrs. Kimball said you might be hiring." He studied her more carefully now, taking in her dusty traveling dress and the carpet bag she'd set down by the door. "You new to Tropic?" "Just arrived. I'm looking for honest work and I'm willing to work hard." "Can you cook?" He asked it casually, as if it were just another question, but Penelope felt the weight of it. This was clearly a restaurant. Of course cooking would be essential. She could lie. She could say yes and hope to figure it out, the way she'd figured out so many other things in her life. But something about his direct gaze made her choose honesty instead. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the fact that she was tired of pretending to be something she wasn't. "No," she said clearly. "I can't cook. I can barely boil water without burning it. My father and I lived in mining camps most of my life, and we ate whatever was available. I never learned." She waited for him to dismiss her, to say there was no point in discussing it further. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, considering. "Can you read and write? Do figures?" "Yes, both well. My father believed in education." "Can you be on time, work a full day, and deal with difficult customers without losing your temper? I've dealt with drunk miners and claim jumpers." "I think I can handle difficult customers." The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. "Fair point. What's your name?" "Penelope Carson." "Will Thompson." He gestured toward one of the tables. "Sit down, Miss Carson. You look like you're about to fall over." She wanted to protest, to maintain her dignity, but her legs made the decision for her, and she sank into the chair gratefully. Will disappeared into the kitchen and returned a moment later with a plate containing a thick slice of bread, butter, and a bowl of stew that steamed gently in the cooler air of the dining room. "Eat that first. Then we'll talk business." Penelope's pride warred with her hunger for about 3 seconds before hunger won decisively. She ate, trying not to wolf the food down like an animal, and it was the best thing she'd tasted in months. The stew had actual vegetables in it, not just potatoes and gristle, and the meat was tender. The bread was fresh enough to still be warm in the center. Will sat down across from her, turned his chair backward, and rested his arms on the back. He waited until she'd finished before speaking again. "Here's what I'm thinking," he said. "I need help in the restaurant. Not just cooking, though that's part of it eventually. I need someone to manage the front, take orders, serve customers, keep the books, order supplies. Someone smart who can learn and isn't afraid of hard work." "That sounds like what I'm looking for," Penelope said carefully. "But you said cooking is part of it eventually." "It is. Because here's my offer. I'll hire you for the other work, and in exchange for a fair wage plus room and board, you'll spend time every day learning to cook. I'll teach you. We'll work through it together, meal by meal, until you know what you're doing." She stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because good help is hard to find out here, and you strike me as someone with sense. Because you were honest when you could have lied. And because I could use someone who can handle the business side while I focus on the kitchen." He paused. "And because everyone deserves to know how to feed themselves properly. It's a basic human skill that you missed out on, through no fault of your own. I can't pay you for lessons." "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to work hard and learn. If you agree, you can stay in the extra room upstairs. It's small but private. 3 meals a day, decent wage, and an education in cooking. What do you say?" Penelope felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest, and it took her a moment to recognize it as hope. "When do I start?" "Right now. Go upstairs and get settled. Second door on the left. Then come back down and I'll show you how to set tables properly before the supper crowd arrives." The room was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk, but it had a real window with glass panes and a door that locked from the inside. Penelope set down her carpetbag and sat on the bed, testing it. A real mattress, not a bedroll on the ground. She let herself have 30 seconds of relief, of feeling safe for the first time in weeks, and then she washed her face and hands in the basin and went back downstairs to work. Will proved to be a patient but exacting teacher when it came to the restaurant business. He showed her how to fold napkins properly, how to arrange silverware, how to pour coffee without splashing. His standards were high, but he never raised his voice when she made mistakes, just corrected her and had her try again. The supper crowd started arriving promptly at 5. Tropic wasn't large, but Thompson's table had apparently earned a reputation. Families came in, along with single men from the farms and ranches in the area, and a few travelers staying at the boarding house who preferred a good meal to Mrs. Kimball's heavy cooking. Penelope took orders, delivered plates, and refilled coffee cups. Her feet hurt by 7 o'clock, and she'd forgotten 2 orders and mixed up 2 more, but Will handled it all smoothly from the kitchen, adjusting on the fly and never making her feel incompetent. By 9 o'clock, the last customers had left, and she helped Will clean up. He washed dishes in the kitchen while she wiped down tables and swept the floor. Her whole body ached with exhaustion, but it was the good kind of tired that came from honest work. "You did well for your first night," Will said when they'd finished. "Tomorrow will be easier. Tomorrow, breakfast starts at 6, which means we start cooking at 5. I'll wake you at 1:45. Penelope felt a moment of panic. "You're going to start teaching me right away." That was the deal, wasn't it? We'll start simple. Breakfast is the easiest meal to learn. He untied his apron and hung it on a hook by the kitchen door. "Get some sleep, Miss Carson. Tomorrow you learn how to cook eggs." She climbed the stairs to her small room, changed into her nightgown, and fell into bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear Will moving around in what must be his room across the hall. It was strange, living in such close quarters with a man she'd just met, but somehow it didn't feel threatening. There was something fundamentally decent about Will Thompson, something she'd sensed immediately and trusted despite her recent experiences. She fell asleep wondering what she'd gotten herself into, and woke to a gentle knock on her door in what felt like 5 minutes later but was actually several hours. 4:45, Miss Carson. Will's voice came through the door. "I'll have coffee ready when you come down." Penelope dragged herself out of bed, splashed water on her face, dressed quickly, and made her way downstairs to the kitchen. True to his word, Will had coffee waiting, along with 2 cups and a look of amused sympathy. "Not a morning person. Not this early in the morning, no. You'll adjust. Drink that and wake up. We have work to do." The kitchen was larger than she'd expected, with a big cast iron stove, work tables, shelves lined with supplies, and windows that would let in good light once the sun rose. Right now it was lit by oil lamps that created pools of warm light in the pre-dawn darkness. Will handed her an apron. "First rule of cooking, protect your clothes. Second rule, keep everything clean as you go. Third rule, pay attention and don't be afraid to ask questions. That's 3 rules." Cooking has a lot of rules, but they all make sense once you understand why they exist. He pulled a basket of eggs toward them. "We're going to start with the most basic skill, frying an egg. Sounds simple, but there's technique to it. Watch first." He showed her how to heat the pan properly, how to add just enough butter, how to crack the egg cleanly against the side of the pan and drop it in without breaking the yolk. The egg sizzled satisfyingly, and he tilted the pan slightly, using a spoon to baste the top with hot butter. "The trick is even cooking," he explained. "You want the white fully set but the yolk still soft. See how the edges are just starting to brown? That's your signal." He slid the egg onto a plate with a practiced motion. "Now you try." Penelope's first egg broke when she cracked it, yolk running everywhere. Her second burned because she had the pan too hot. Her third stuck to the pan and turned into scrambled eggs when she tried to flip it. Will didn't laugh or lose patience. He just kept coaching her, adjusting the heat, showing her again how to crack the egg with confidence rather than timidity. Her 4th egg was edible. Her 5th was actually decent. By the time the sun started rising and they needed to prepare for the breakfast customers, she'd successfully fried a dozen eggs and felt absurdly proud of herself. "Good start," Will said. Tomorrow we'll add bacon to the lesson. For now, watch how I manage multiple orders at once." She watched, fascinated, as he transformed into something like a conductor, orchestrating multiple dishes at various stages of completion. Eggs, bacon, flapjacks, toast, all timed perfectly so that each plate came together hot and ready to serve. His movements were economical and confident, born of years of practice. The breakfast crowd was steady but not overwhelming. Penelope took orders, served food, and poured enough coffee to float a boat. Between customers, she helped Will in the kitchen, learning by observation and occasional participation. "Why did you start a restaurant?" she asked during a lull, genuinely curious. "Most men out here are ranching or mining or farming. Will flipped a flapjack with a quick wrist motion. "My mother ran a boarding house in Denver when I was growing up. She cooked for 20 people every day, and I helped her from the time I could reach the stove. When she died, my father wanted me to go into business with him. He was a banker. Respectable work, he said, safe. But you didn't want that. I wanted to cook. I wanted to create something people needed and enjoyed. Father thought it was beneath me, beneath our family name. We had a falling out about it. I came out here to Utah Territory 5 years ago, started this place from nothing." He plated the flapjacks and added butter and syrup. "Never regretted it. You talk to your father now." "No. He made it clear I wasn't welcome unless I gave up this foolishness and came home." Will's expression was neutral, but Penelope heard the old hurt underneath. His loss. "I'm doing what I love." She took the plate out to the customer, thinking about families and expectations and the courage it took to choose your own path. When she came back, she said, "My father dragged me all over Nevada Territory chasing silver and gold, never struck it rich. I think he loved the search more than the finding. He died 2 weeks ago." Will looked up from the stove, his eyes sympathetic. "I'm sorry. Were you close, in our way? He wasn't much of a father by conventional standards, but he loved me and he taught me to think for myself." "That's worth something." "That's worth a lot," Will said quietly. "Is that why you came to Tropic, starting over?" "Something like that." She wasn't ready to tell him about the men from Silver Ridge, about the danger that might still be following her. "I needed a change." He nodded, accepting her privacy. "Well, you picked a good town for it. People here mostly mind their own business and help out when needed. You'll fit in fine." Over the following weeks, Penelope discovered that Will was right about more than just cooking. Tropic was a good town, populated by Mormon families who'd settled the valley, and a handful of others like Will who'd come seeking land or opportunity or escape. The people were reserved at first, as small-town folk often were with strangers, but they warmed up when they saw she worked hard and didn't cause trouble. Every morning started with cooking lessons. After she mastered eggs, Will taught her bacon, then flapjacks, then biscuits. She learned to judge when bread dough had risen enough, how to tell when meat was done by touching it, how to season properly by tasting as she went. "Cooking is about paying attention," Will told her one morning as she stirred gravy, trying to get the consistency right. "You can't just follow a recipe blindly. You have to watch, taste, adjust. Every batch of flour is slightly different. Every stove heats differently. Every piece of meat is unique. You learn the principles, then you adapt." "That's harder than it sounds," Penelope muttered, watching the gravy carefully for lumps. "Most worthwhile things are." He leaned over to check her work. "That's good, nice and smooth, see? You're getting it." His praise shouldn't have mattered so much, but it did. Penelope found herself working harder to earn those small acknowledgments, those moments when Will would taste something she'd made and nod with genuine approval. She was learning more than just cooking. She was learning Will himself, the quiet rhythms of his days, the careful way he treated people, the standards he held himself to. He was up before dawn every day, preparing for breakfast service. He sourced the best ingredients he could find in their remote location, paying fairly and building relationships with local farmers and ranchers. He never served anything he wouldn't eat himself, and he treated his restaurant like it mattered, like it was something more than just a business. "Why such high standards?" she asked one day as he rejected a delivery of vegetables that weren't up to his expectations. "We're in the middle of Utah territory, not San Francisco. People would eat whatever you served them." "That's exactly why it matters," Will said. "People here work hard. They deserve food that's made with care and respect. Just because we're in a small town doesn't mean we have to accept less." Penelope had never met anyone quite like him. Most of the men she'd known in mining camps were rough, looking for the next big score, treating everything as temporary, including their relationships and their responsibilities. Will was building something permanent, investing in quality and community for the long term. She found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, noticing the way his hair fell across his forehead when he leaned over the stove, the capable movements of his hands as he chopped vegetables or kneaded bread, the rare smile that transformed his usually serious face when something pleased him. It was dangerous territory, she knew. She was his employee living under his roof, dependent on his generosity. Getting feelings involved would complicate everything. But her heart didn't seem to care about logic. One evening after they'd closed up, Will said, "Come here. I want to show you something." He led her into the kitchen and pointed to the stove. "Tomorrow you're going to cook the entire breakfast service." Penelope felt her stomach drop. "What? No, I'm not ready." "You are. You've learned all the basics. You've watched me manage multiple orders for weeks now. It's time to try." "What if I ruin everything? What if I burn the food or forget orders or—" "Then we'll handle it," Will said calmly. "I'll be right here. I won't let you fail, but you need to do this, Penelope. You need to prove to yourself that you can." She wanted to argue, but he was looking at her with such confidence, such certainty that she was capable, that she found herself nodding despite her fear. "Okay," she said. "I'll try." "You'll do more than try, you'll succeed." That night she barely slept, running through recipes in her mind, imagining all the ways things could go wrong. When Will knocked on her door at 4:45, she was already dressed and anxious. "Breathe," he said when he saw her face. "It's just breakfast, same things you've been practicing. You know how to do this." The first order came in at 6:15. Eggs, bacon, toast. Simple. Penelope's hands shook slightly as she cracked the eggs, but they hit the pan cleanly. She watched the heat, basted them with butter the way Will had taught her, and plated them with crisp bacon and perfectly brown toast. "Good," Will said from where he stood behind her, close enough to intervene but giving her space. "Next order." The morning built gradually, giving her time to find her rhythm. 2 eggs scrambled, flapjacks, more bacon. She burned one piece of toast and had to start over, but she didn't panic. She just made more the way Will had taught her. By 8 o'clock, she was handling 3 orders at once, juggling pans and timing and temperatures the way she'd watched Will do countless times. Her confidence grew with each successfully completed plate. "You've got this," Will said quietly. "I'm going to step out and help serve. Keep going exactly like you are." For the next hour, Penelope cooked breakfast on her own. She made mistakes. One batch of flapjacks was too brown. Some bacon was slightly crispy, but nothing was inedible, and most of it was actually good. When the rush finally slowed and she could take a breath, she felt a surge of accomplishment unlike anything she'd experienced before. Will came back into the kitchen wearing a smile she'd never seen before, wide and genuine and proud. "You did it," he said. "That was excellent work, Penelope. Really excellent." She laughed, surprised by how good it felt to hear. I can't believe I actually did it. I cooked breakfast for an entire restaurant. You did more than that. You proved you can learn anything you set your mind to. He hesitated, then added, I'm proud of you. Something shifted between them in that moment, a boundary crossing that they both felt but neither acknowledged. The air seemed charged, and Penelope found herself very aware of how close Will was standing, of the warmth in his eyes as he looked at her. Thank you, she said softly, for teaching me, for believing I could do it. Thank you for being willing to learn. That takes courage. They stood there for a moment too long, and then Will cleared his throat and stepped back. We should clean up. Lunch preparation starts in an hour. The days continued to pass, marked by meals prepared and served, by cooking lessons that grew more advanced, by long evenings cleaning up together while they talked about everything and nothing. Penelope learned to make stews that could simmer all day, roasts that came out tender and flavorful, pies with crusts that were actually flaky instead of leaden. She also learned that she loved the work. There was something deeply satisfying about creating food that nourished people, about seeing customers enjoy what she'd made, about the concrete accomplishment of a successful meal service. I never expected this, she told Will one evening as they worked together on a beef stew that would be the next day's special. I never thought I'd enjoy cooking. I thought it was something women were supposed to do, a chore to endure. Anything can be a chore if you approach it that way, Will said, checking the seasoning in the pot. But cooking can also be creative, satisfying work. It's about how you choose to see it. You always choose to see things positively, don't you? Not always, but I try. Life's too short to spend it being miserable about things you have to do anyway. She added more carrots to the stew, cutting them the way he'd taught her, uniform pieces that would cook evenly. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. I reserve the right not to answer. Fair enough. She kept her eyes on her work, not wanting to seem too interested in the answer. Why aren't you married? You're what, 30? 29, and I was married, actually, for about 2 years. Penelope looked up in surprise. She hadn't expected that. What happened? Her name was Sarah. We met in Denver, married young. She came out here with me when I started the restaurant, but she hated it. Hated the isolation, hated the small town, hated that I worked all the time. She gave me an ultimatum: sell the restaurant and move back to Denver or she was leaving. He stirred the stew methodically. I couldn't do it. This place is my dream, my life's work, so she left. I'm sorry. I am too in some ways, but we wanted different things. Better to figure that out early than waste both our lives being unhappy together. He glanced at her. What about you? Any romantic entanglements in your past? Nothing serious. Hard to have relationships when you're moving from mining camp to mining camp every few months. There was a surveyor once who I thought might be something, but he moved on to California, and that was that. His loss, Will said simply, and the way he said it made Penelope's heart skip. They were dancing around something, both of them aware of the growing attraction but neither quite ready to name it. The balance was delicate. They worked together, lived in the same building, depended on each other professionally. Acting on feelings could ruin everything they'd built, but the feelings kept growing anyway. It came to a head on a hot August afternoon when the restaurant was closed between lunch and dinner service. Penelope was upstairs in her room, door open to catch any breeze, trying to mend a torn dress. She'd never been good at sewing either, and her stitches were comically uneven. Will appeared in the doorway, then stopped. Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. I was just checking if you needed anything from the store. Just patience and skill with a needle, Penelope said ruefully, holding up her disastrous work. I can cook now, but I still can't sew worth a damn. He laughed, a real laugh that crinkled his eyes. Want some help? My mother taught me basic mending. Restaurant owner learns to fix his own apron strings. You'd help me so. Why not? You helped me perfect my biscuit recipe last week. So Will Thompson sat in her small room and showed her how to make small, even stitches, how to tie off thread properly, how to make invisible repairs. His hands were careful and competent, and Penelope found herself watching them more than the sewing. "You really can do everything, can't you?" she said. "Hardly. I'm terrible at fixing mechanical things. I can't carry a tune, and my handwriting is atrocious. We all have our limitations." "That's a short list. What about yours?" "Well, until recently I couldn't cook. I can't sew. I'm impatient. I have a temper, though I try to control it. I'm probably too independent for my own good, and I'm wanted by some very dangerous men who might come looking for me one day." She hadn't meant to say that last part. It slipped out, and the moment it did, she regretted it. Will's hand stilled on the sewing. "What?" Penelope set down the dress and met his eyes. She owed him the truth now. "My father was killed in Silver Ridge. It wasn't a random shooting. Men wanted his claims and they murdered him for them. They came after me too. I ran. That's why I ended up here." "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I didn't want to bring danger to your door. Because I was afraid you'd send me away if you knew." She stood up, agitated. "I should probably leave. I shouldn't have put you at risk like this. Sit down." Will's voice was firm but not angry. "You're not going anywhere. You don't understand. These men are. I understand that you're in danger, and that makes me want to protect you, not send you away." He set down the sewing and stood too, moving closer. "Look at me, Penelope." She did, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. "I've been trying not to say this," Will continued quietly. "Trying to be professional and appropriate. But I need you to know that you're not just my employee. You haven't been for a while now. I care about what happens to you. I care about you." "Will, let me finish. I know the situation is complicated. You work for me, you live here. There's a power imbalance that makes this difficult. I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated to respond. But I also can't keep pretending that I don't feel something beyond friendship. So there it is. You can do with that information whatever you want." Penelope felt like her heart was trying to escape her chest. "You care about me?" "Yes, very much." "As in romantically care about me?" "Yes." She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "Thank God, because I've been falling in love with you for weeks and trying desperately to hide it." Will blinked. "You have. How could I not? You've been kind and patient. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You taught me skills that changed my life. You treat me like an equal and a partner. You make me laugh. You make me feel safe. And you're handsome, which doesn't hurt." A slow smile spread across his face. "You think I'm handsome? That's what you took from everything I just said." "I'm choosing to focus on the compliments, yes." She stepped closer to him, feeling bold. "Will Thompson, I don't know what I'm doing here, and I'm probably about to make this incredibly complicated, but I'm in love with you. Penelope Carson, I'm in love with you too." He reached out and gently cupped her face with one hand. "And I don't care if it's complicated. We'll figure it out together." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. His lips were soft but certain, and Penelope melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him back with all the feeling she'd been holding in for weeks. They broke apart, both slightly breathless, and Will rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he admitted. "Me too. We should probably talk about what this means. For us, for the restaurant, for everything." "Later," Penelope said. "Right now I just want to enjoy this moment." So they stood there in her small room, holding each other, and let themselves be happy without worrying about complications or consequences. Of course, reality couldn't be ignored forever. That evening, after dinner service, They sat together at one of the restaurant tables and tried to figure out their new situation. "Nothing has to change with work," Will said. "You're good at your job. That hasn't been because of any feelings involved. You earned your place here." "I know, but people will talk. Small town, unmarried man and woman working together, living in the same building, now romantically involved. You know how that goes. Let them talk. I don't care about gossip. Your reputation is fine. I'm a respected business owner. You're a hard worker who's been nothing but proper. If anyone has a problem with us courting, that's their issue, not ours." Penelope loved that he called it courting, loved the old-fashioned formality of it. "So we're courting now, if you're agreeable to that." "I'd like to court you properly, Penelope. Take you to church socials, go on walks, let people see that my intentions are honorable. Even though we're living in the same building, even though. Besides, it's not like we're alone. We're in separate rooms. There are customers in and out all day. Mrs. Kimball from the boarding house watches everything that happens on this street. We're probably the most supervised courting couple in Utah territory." She laughed at that. "True enough." "There's something else we need to discuss," Will said more seriously. "The men from Silver Ridge. Do you think they'll come here?" "I don't know. I try to cover my tracks, but I'm not exactly experienced at running away. If they're determined enough, they might find me." "Then we need to be prepared. I'll talk to Marshal Davison tomorrow, explain the situation. He should know there might be trouble coming." "Will, I don't want you caught up in my problems." "Too late. I'm already caught up. You're not facing this alone anymore." That simple statement made Penelope want to cry with relief. For weeks, she'd been carrying the fear alone, looking over her shoulder, waiting for danger to find her. The idea that someone else would help shoulder that burden was overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered. "No thanks needed. We take care of each other. That's how this works." Marshal Davison was a weathered man in his 50s who'd seen enough trouble to take their story seriously. He listened to Penelope's account of her father's murder and the subsequent threats, asked good questions, and promised to keep an eye out for strangers matching her descriptions. "I'll talk to the stage driver too," he said. "Make sure we know who's coming into town. If these fellows show up, we'll be ready for them." "I don't want anyone getting hurt on my account," Penelope said, "and we don't want anyone getting hurt, period. That's why we're taking precautions." He looked at Will. "You know how to handle a gun well enough." "I've got a shotgun in the restaurant and a pistol upstairs." "Good. Hopefully it won't come to that, but better prepared than surprised." Word got around quickly, as it did in small towns. Within a day, half of Tropic knew that Penelope was being courted by Will Thompson, and the other half knew she might be in danger from men out of Silver Ridge. The response surprised her. Ranchers started making excuses to stop by the restaurant, mentioning casually that they'd be happy to help if any trouble arrived. Farm wives brought by extra preserves and baked goods, their way of showing support. Even stern Mrs. Kimball from the boarding house stopped Penelope on the street to say she was glad to see her settled with such a good man. "We look after our own here," Mrs. Kimball said. "You're part of Tropic now. That means something." It meant more than Penelope could express. She'd spent most of her life as a transient, never part of any community, always the outsider. Being claimed by a town, being protected by people who barely knew her, felt like a gift she hadn't known to hope for. As summer turned to fall, bringing cooler temperatures and brilliant red leaves to the cottonwoods along the river, Penelope found herself happier than she'd ever been. Her cooking had improved to the point where she could handle most meals independently, freeing Will up to experiment with new dishes and plan for the future. They courted slowly, with all the proper restraint small-town propriety required. They took walks along the river in the evenings when the restaurant was closed. They attended church together, sitting in the back pew while curious eyes tracked their every move. They stole kisses in the kitchen when no one was around, quick touches that left them both wanting more but knowing they needed to wait. "How long is a proper courtship supposed to last?" Will asked one evening as they walked under a sky full of stars. "I don't know. My father wasn't exactly traditional about such things." "Why?" "Because I already know I want to marry you and waiting feels pointless." Penelope stopped walking and turned to face him. "You want to marry me? Is that surprising? I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine and I'm yours. Marriage seems like the logical next step." "The logical next step," Penelope repeated, amused. "You make it sound like a recipe." "Maybe it is. Take one hard-working woman with a good heart and a sharp mind. Add one man who loves her desperately. Mix together, apply legal and spiritual bonds and see what develops." She laughed and kissed him, right there on the public street where anyone could see. "That's the worst proposal I've ever heard." "It's not a proposal yet. I'm still trying to figure out the right way to do it." "There's no right way. Just whatever feels true to us." 2 weeks later, Will closed the restaurant early on a Saturday afternoon and led Penelope on a walk up into the Red Rock Canyons behind town. They climbed higher than they'd ever gone before, following a narrow trail that switchbacked up the canyon wall. "Where are we going?" Penelope asked, slightly out of breath. "You'll see. We're almost there." They emerged onto a flat overlook that provided a stunning view of the entire valley. Tropic spread out below them, small and perfect against the red earth. The Virgin River wound through like a silver ribbon, and the late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and crimson. "It's beautiful," Penelope breathed. "This is my favorite place in the territory," Will said. "I come up here when I need to think or make important decisions. I wanted to share it with you." He took her hand and turned her to face him. "Penelope Carson, I don't have a fancy speech prepared. I'm just a man who got incredibly lucky when you walked into my restaurant looking for work. You've made my life better in every possible way. You've made me better. I love you completely and I want to spend the rest of my life cooking meals with you, building dreams with you, facing whatever comes together. Will you marry me?" Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes, absolutely yes." Will pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small garnet stone. "It's not much. I can get something fancier if you want. It's perfect. I don't need fancy, I just need you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed there on the overlook as the sun painted the canyon walls in fire. When they finally broke apart, Penelope realized she was crying. "Happy tears," she assured Will. "Very happy tears." They sat on the rocks and watched the sun set, making plans for their future. A small wedding, they agreed, just close friends and townspeople. They'd keep running the restaurant together, maybe expand eventually if business continued to grow. They'd build a real home, either adding onto the building or constructing something new by the river. "I want children eventually," Will said. "If you do." "I do. I want to give them the stable home I never had, roots, belonging. They'll have that, we'll make sure of it." As darkness fell and stars emerged in the vast desert sky, they made their way back down to town. The restaurant would be buzzing tomorrow with the news, but for tonight, it was just the two of them and their happiness. They set the wedding date for October 20th, giving themselves time to prepare but not so long that they'd grow impatient with waiting. Penelope had a dress made by the seamstress in town, pale blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. It wasn't fancy, but it was new and clean and hers. The church was packed on their wedding day. The whole town turned out, along with ranchers and farmers from miles around. Penelope stood at the altar next to Will, holding his hands and promising to love and honor him for the rest of her life, and meant every word. They celebrated afterward with food from the restaurant, prepared the day before, and served by friends who shooed them away from any actual work. There was music and dancing and toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious. As the evening wound down, Penelope found herself standing with Will at the edge of the gathering, watching their friends and neighbors enjoy themselves. "Happy?" Will asked. "Unbelievably so." "Me too." He squeezed her hand. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Thompson?" The title sent a thrill through her. "Very ready, Mr. Thompson." They slipped away from the celebration and walked back to the restaurant through the cool October night. Their living situation had changed slightly in preparation for marriage. Will had knocked down the wall between their two small rooms, creating one larger space that would serve as their bedroom. It wasn't huge, but it was theirs. That night, they made love for the first time, and Penelope discovered that physical intimacy with someone you loved was entirely different from anything she'd imagined. Will was gentle and patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished. The experience was awkward in some moments and perfect in others, and by the end they were both laughing and holding each other close. "I love you," Will said against her hair. "I love you too, so much." They fell asleep tangled together, and Penelope woke in the middle of the night disoriented until she remembered. She was married. She had a husband. She had a home. The joy of it was almost overwhelming. Life as a married couple settled into comfortable routines. They worked side by side in the restaurant, anticipating each other's needs and moving around the kitchen in an easy dance born of familiarity and affection. Penelope continued to improve her cooking skills, and Will encouraged her to develop her own specialties. She discovered she had a talent for baking, creating pies and cakes that became favorites among their customers. Will's savory cooking combined with her desserts made Thompson's table a destination, drawing people from surrounding settlements who'd heard about the quality of the food. "We should consider expanding," Will said one evening as they counted receipts and realized they'd had their best month ever. "Maybe add more tables, extend the hours, or we could hire help," Penelope suggested. "We're working ourselves ragged as it is." "Fair point. What about both?" "Expand moderately, hire 1 or 2 people to help." They discussed it over the following weeks, making plans and calculating costs. In early December, they hired a young woman named Sarah to help with serving and a teenage boy named James to wash dishes and do basic prep work. The additional help made an enormous difference, giving Penelope and Will time to breathe and focus on the work they did best. Christmas arrived, bringing with it a celebration at the church and a rare day off for the restaurant. Will and Penelope spent it quietly together, exchanging simple gifts. She gave him a new chef's knife she'd ordered from Salt Lake City. He gave her a leather-bound journal for recording recipes and a beautiful winter shawl. "I have one more gift," Will said after they'd opened everything, "but it's more of a question." "What kind of question?" "How do you feel about building a house? A real house, not just rooms above the restaurant, somewhere with space for a family." Penelope set down her shawl carefully. "Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying I'd like to start trying for children if you're ready. And I think we should have a proper home to raise them in." "I'm ready," Penelope said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been ready." They spent the winter making plans and with increasing frequency, making love with the intention of creating life. By February, Penelope was fairly certain she was pregnant, though she waited another few weeks to be sure before telling Will. She chose to tell him on a busy Saturday morning, right in the middle of breakfast service. She probably should have waited for a more private moment, but she couldn't hold it in any longer. "I'm pregnant," she said as she passed him in the kitchen, carrying a stack of dirty plates. Will nearly dropped the spatula he was holding. What? Pregnant with child. We're having a baby. She grinned at his shocked expression. Probably due in October. He abandoned the stove entirely, pulled her into his arms, and spun her around despite the fact that they had a full dining room waiting for food. We're having a baby, he repeated, like he needed to say it out loud to believe it. We are. Now get back to those eggs before they burn. The rest of breakfast service passed in a blur of happiness. Will couldn't stop smiling, and every time he looked at Penelope, his face lit up with joy. By noon, everyone in the restaurant knew, and by evening, everyone in Tropic knew. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Penelope had some morning sickness in the early months, but nothing severe. She continued working in the restaurant, though Will fussed over her constantly, trying to keep her from doing anything too strenuous. I'm pregnant, not fragile, she reminded him repeatedly. Women have been working through pregnancy since the beginning of time. I know, but you're my wife. I'm allowed to worry quietly while I carry these plates. They broke ground on their house in April, building on a piece of land Will had purchased just outside town, close enough to walk to the restaurant but far enough for privacy. The construction moved quickly with help from friends and neighbors who volunteered their time and skills. By July, the house was finished. It wasn't large or fancy, but it had 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, a sitting room, and a front porch that faced west toward the canyons. They moved in their modest possessions and spent their first night in their new home lying in bed, listening to the sounds of the river and feeling grateful beyond words. This is ours, Penelope said, her hand on her swollen belly. Our home, our family. Everything I ever wanted, Will agreed. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the knowledge that the baby would come soon. Penelope was enormous, uncomfortable, and ready to be done with pregnancy. She'd stopped working in the restaurant at the beginning of the month, spending her days at home preparing baby clothes and trying not to worry about the upcoming birth. Will came home every afternoon between lunch and dinner service to check on her, bringing treats from the restaurant and updates on the day's activities. His attentiveness was sweet, even if Penelope occasionally found it excessive. The baby came in the middle of the night on October 3rd, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Penelope woke Will around midnight with the news that her water had broken, and he immediately ran to fetch the midwife while trying not to panic. Mrs. Anderson, the midwife, was calm and competent, which helped enormously as the contractions grew stronger. Will stayed by Penelope's side, holding her hand and letting her squeeze it as hard as she needed. You're doing great, he kept saying. So strong, so brave. I hate you for doing this to me, Penelope gasped during a particularly strong contraction. That's fair. I love you, but I also hate you right now. Completely understandable. After hours of labor that felt endless but probably weren't actually that long, Mrs. Anderson said, almost there. One more big push, dear. Penelope pushed with everything she had left, and suddenly a baby's cry filled the room, loud and indignant and perfect. It's a boy, Mrs. Anderson announced, holding up a squirming, red-faced infant. A healthy boy. She cleaned him quickly and placed him in Penelope's arms. He was tiny and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful, with a shock of dark hair, and his eyes squeezed shut against the bright lamplight. We have a son, Penelope whispered, tears streaming down her face. Will was crying too, staring at the baby like he couldn't quite believe he was real. He's perfect. You're perfect. I love you both so much. They named him Thomas William Thompson, calling him Thomas. He was a good baby, fussy sometimes but generally content, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Penelope was exhausted from lack of sleep and the demands of caring for an infant, but she'd never been happier. Will was a devoted father, helping with night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed. He'd rearranged his schedule at the restaurant so he could spend mornings at home, going in for the lunch rush and evening service, but being present for his family as much as possible. "I don't want to be the kind of father who's always at work," he told Penelope. "I want to actually know my son." "You're a wonderful father," she assured him. "Thomas is lucky to have you." As the months passed and Thomas grew, Penelope found herself marveling at the life they'd built. A year ago she'd been running for her life, desperate and alone. Now she had a husband she loved, a son who filled her heart, a home, a business, a community. It was more than she'd ever imagined possible. The men from Silver Ridge never came. Either they'd given up the search, or they'd never bothered to track her to Tropic. Eventually, Penelope stopped looking over her shoulder, stopped expecting danger to arrive. She let herself feel safe. When Thomas was 6 months old, Penelope returned to work part-time at the restaurant, bringing the baby with her. He napped in a cradle in the corner of the kitchen, and customers delighted in seeing him when they came in. The arrangement worked surprisingly well, allowing Penelope to stay involved in the business while still caring for Thomas. On their second wedding anniversary, Will surprised her by closing the restaurant for an entire day. They left Thomas with Mrs. Anderson and hiked back up to the overlook where he'd proposed. "I wanted to come back here," Will said as they sat on the rocks looking out over the valley. "Remind ourselves of where we started. Best decision I ever made, saying yes to you," Penelope said. "Best decision I ever made was offering to teach you to cook," Will countered. "Though honestly, I think I would have found any excuse to keep you around. I was half in love with you from the moment you walked into the restaurant looking determined and terrified at the same time. I was so scared that day. I had no idea what I was going to do or how I was going to survive. And now look at us. Running a successful restaurant, raising a son, building a life. We learned together," Penelope said softly. "Every step, every meal, every challenge, together. That's how it works best," Will agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the vast blue sky. Finally, Penelope said, "I want more children, not right away, but eventually." "Me too. How many are we thinking?" "I don't know. As many as we're blessed with, I suppose. 3 or 4, maybe. A full table," Will said with a smile. "I like that idea." They did have more children. A daughter named Alina arrived 2 years after Thomas, followed by another son, Michael, 2 years after that. Each pregnancy, each birth, each new addition to their family felt like a miracle. The restaurant continued to thrive. They expanded again, adding a separate bakery where Penelope could focus on desserts and bread while Will handled the main kitchen. They hired more staff as business grew, eventually employing 6 people full-time. Thompson's Table became something of a regional landmark, known throughout southern Utah Territory for quality food and warm hospitality. People made special trips to eat there, and more than one traveler told stories about the husband and wife team who cooked together with obvious love and skill. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved helping his father in the kitchen. Alina was spirited and creative, always coming up with new recipe ideas and combinations. Michael was the charmer, winning over customers with his smile and easy conversation. Penelope taught all of them to cook, the same way Will had taught her, with patience, encouragement, and the understanding that mistakes were part of learning. She wanted them to have the skills she'd lacked, but more than that, she wanted them to understand the joy and satisfaction that came from creating something with your own hands. "You're a natural teacher," Will told her one day as they watched 8-year-old Thomas successfully flip pancakes. "You're patient and clear, and you make it fun." "I learned from the best," Penelope said, leaning against him. "I'm serious. You've come so far from the woman who couldn't boil water without burning it. You should be proud." "I am, but I'm more proud of us, of what we built together." Years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays, by busy seasons at the restaurant and quieter times in winter, by the small joys and occasional challenges of family life. Through it all, Penelope and Will remained partners in every sense of the word, working together, laughing together, raising their children together. When Utah achieved statehood in 1896, they celebrated with a special menu at the restaurant and a party that lasted well into the night. Thomas was 18 by then, Alina 16, and Michael 14. They were good kids, all three of them, raised with strong values and loving discipline. "Hard to believe we've been here nearly 20 years, Will said as they closed up after the statehood celebration. "Remember when you first arrived, dusty, desperate, and completely incapable of cooking? How could I forget? I think about that day sometimes. What if you'd gone to a different town? What if you'd walked past the restaurant? What if you'd lied about being able to cook? I'd have burned down your kitchen eventually and gotten fired, probably." Will laughed. "Probably true. But seriously, I'm grateful for every choice that led you to that moment. To me too." Penelope took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses from years of kitchen work. "You changed my life, Will Thompson. You gave me skills and confidence and love and family. You gave me everything." "We gave it to each other," he corrected. "I was alone before you came. Successful maybe, but alone. You made the restaurant feel like a home. You made my life complete." They walked home together through the quiet streets of Tropic, past darkened buildings and under star-filled skies. The house they'd built all those years ago was lit from within, their children still awake and waiting for them. As they approached, Penelope could see Alina in the window, probably reading by lamplight. Thomas would be studying his business ledgers, planning for when he'd eventually take over the restaurant. Michael was likely charming some girl he'd met at the celebration. "We did good," Will said softly, seeing the same scene. "We did great," Penelope corrected. Inside, their children greeted them with enthusiasm, wanting to talk about the celebration and the significance of statehood and what it might mean for the future. They stayed up late as a family, talking and laughing and sharing dreams. Eventually the children headed to bed, and Penelope and Will found themselves alone in their bedroom, the same room they'd shared for nearly 20 years. "I love you," Penelope said as they lay down together. "Still. Always. More every day somehow." "That's how good love works," Will said, pulling her close. "It doesn't diminish with time. It deepens and grows and becomes part of who you are." "When did you become such a philosopher?" "When I met a woman who couldn't cook and decided to teach her, meal by meal, and ended up falling completely in love with her in the process." Penelope smiled against his chest. "Best meals I ever learned to make. Best student I ever had." They fell asleep the way they always did, wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged. The years continued to unfold with their particular mixture of ordinary days and extraordinary moments. Thomas did eventually take over primary management of the restaurant, though Will and Penelope remained involved, teaching and advising and occasionally taking over the kitchen when they missed the daily work. Alina surprised them by announcing at 19 that she wanted to open her own bakery in a nearby town. She'd inherited her mother's talent for pastries and her father's business sense, and within 2 years, her bakery was thriving. Michael became a rancher, marrying a local girl and settling on land just outside Tropic. He and his wife had 4 children who delighted in visiting their grandparents and learning to cook in the famous restaurant kitchen. Penelope and Will became grandparents, then great-grandparents. They grew older together, their hair turning gray and then white, their movements becoming slower but their love remaining constant. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children organized a massive celebration at the restaurant. Friends from across the region attended, along with 3 generations of family. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, and enough food to feed an army. 40 years, Penelope said to Will as they stood in the middle of it all, watching their family celebrate. Can you believe it? Some days yes, some days no. Time is strange that way. Any regrets? Not a single one. You? Only that we didn't meet sooner. She paused. Actually, no, I take that back. Everything happened exactly when it needed to. If we'd met earlier, we would have been different people. It might not have worked. Good point. So no regrets at all. None whatsoever. They danced that night, moving slowly to music played by local musicians, holding each other close. Around them, their children and grandchildren danced too, their great-grandchildren running between legs and causing delightful chaos. This is what it's all about, Will said quietly. Not just the romance or even the love, though those matter. It's this. Family, community, legacy. Knowing that we built something that will outlast us. The restaurant, yes. But more than that, we built a family. We built relationships. We taught our children and grandchildren about hard work and kindness and the value of doing something well. That's the real legacy. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. When did you get so wise? When I got old enough to see things clearly. Several more years passed, bringing changes inevitable with age. Will developed arthritis in his hands that made detailed kitchen work difficult. Penelope's eyesight weakened, requiring glasses that she constantly misplaced. They spent more time at home and less at the restaurant, content to let the younger generation take over while they enjoyed their remaining years together. They still cooked together, though, preparing meals in their own kitchen just for the 2 of them or for visiting family. The rhythms of working side by side remained comfortable and familiar, even after all these years. One autumn morning, as they prepared breakfast together in their kitchen with sunlight streaming through the windows, Penelope looked at Will and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. I need to tell you something, she said. Will looked up from the eggs he was frying. What's that? Thank you. For everything. For teaching me to cook when you could have just sent me away. For being patient when I was learning. For loving me. For building this life with me. For every single meal we've shared, every moment we've had together. Thank you. Will set down his spatula and came around the counter to take her hands. His grip was weaker than it used to be. His hands gnarled with age, but his touch was still the same gentle strength she'd fallen in love with decades ago. Penelope Thompson, loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Teaching you to cook was just an excuse to keep you close. Everything else, the restaurant, the family, all of it, that's just been us learning together. And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Even when I burned the biscuits, especially when you burned the biscuits, those failures taught you, made you better. Just like life's challenges taught us both. She kissed him then, a soft kiss full of decades of love and memory and gratitude. When they pulled apart, Will smiled. Now, help me with these eggs before they burn. Some habits are too important to let go. So Penelope stood beside her husband in their kitchen, helping him cook breakfast the way they'd done thousands of times before. They worked in comfortable silence, anticipating each other's needs through long familiarity. The eggs turned out perfectly, as they usually did these days. They ate together at their small kitchen table, watching birds flit through the garden they'd planted years ago. It was an ordinary morning, unremarkable in almost every way and absolutely perfect. "What should we make for dinner?" Will asked as they cleaned up the breakfast dishes. "How about that stew you taught me when I first started learning, the one I could never get the seasoning right on?" "You get it perfect now. That's because I had a good teacher." She smiled at him. "And because we learned together over every single meal." Will returned her smile, his eyes crinkling in the way that had always made her heart skip. "Over every single meal," he agreed. "And we'll keep learning together for as many meals as we have left." They continued cooking together, teaching together, loving together through their remaining years. When Will passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Penelope mourned the loss of her partner, her love, her best friend. But she didn't regret a single day they'd spent together. She lived another 3 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of whom had learned to cook in the Thompson tradition. The restaurant was in its 3rd generation of family ownership, still maintaining the standards Will had established so many decades ago. On what would have been their 56th wedding anniversary, Penelope spent the day cooking. She made all of Will's favorite dishes, the ones they'd perfected together over the years. Her hands were slow and shaky now, but they remembered the movements, the techniques he'd taught her with such patience. That evening, surrounded by family in the house they'd built together, Penelope told them stories about learning to cook, about burning eggs and ruined biscuits, about a patient man who'd believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. "The secret to good cooking," she told them, "isn't just following recipes or mastering techniques. It's cooking with love. It's being willing to learn and make mistakes and try again. And it's so much better when you have someone to learn with, someone to share every meal and every moment." She looked around at her family, at the legacy she and Will had created together, and felt complete satisfaction. They'd built something beautiful together, starting from the simple act of teaching an inexperienced woman how to cook. When Penelope passed peacefully a few weeks later, the family buried her next to Will on a hillside overlooking Tropic. At the funeral, Thomas spoke about his parents' love story, about how it all began when his mother confessed she couldn't cook and his father said they'd learned together over every meal. "And they did," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "They learned together. They grew together. They built a life and a family together. They showed all of us what real partnership looks like, what real love looks like. Every meal they cooked together was an act of love, and that love sustained them for over 50 years. The restaurant continued to thrive for generations, always called Thompson's Table, always maintaining the standards of quality and care that Will and Penelope had established. And in the kitchen, displayed in a place of honor, was a framed sign that read, "We learned together, over every meal." It was a reminder, a legacy, and a love story all contained in those simple words. Because sometimes the greatest romances don't start with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Sometimes they start with honesty, with vulnerability, with one person saying, "I can't do this," and another person saying, "Then we'll learn together." And sometimes those simple beginnings lead to extraordinary lives, filled with love and family and countless shared meals that nourish not just the body but the soul. That was the true legacy of Penelope, and Will Thompson not just a successful restaurant or even a large family, but the enduring proof that learning together, growing together, and facing life's challenges together can transform two people into something greater than either could have been alone. Their story became part of Tropic's history, told and retold to children and grandchildren, always ending the same way, with two people who loved each other learning to cook together, one meal at a time for the rest of their lives. And that, as everyone agreed, was the perfect recipe for happiness.